guys. Today I put a link in the description box, and it's something that you will need for this lesson. You won't need it right at the beginning, but you'll need it eventually. So while we're getting kind of geared up and as I'm going through some of the preliminaries, you can head over to the link and download. The link does go to Patreon, but it's a public post, so you can access it and download and comment and chat with the people on there as well. So go to the description box, click that link, and download your Passover reflection journal. So while they're doing that, I'm going to give you kind of a background for the Passover reflection journal. So where it kind of came from, I was 2 days ago, as we were wrapping up Passover, I was sitting down and I was kind of reflecting. And in the process of reflecting, I was thinking through kind of each concept that I put on here. I kind of added a couple of other things to kind of make it a little more fluid. But I was thinking through each of these concepts, and I said, this may be something somebody else might want to do. And so kind of typed it out, shared it with the Royal Roots team. They liked it, so sharing it with you guys. The reason why it became our lesson for today is twofold. So on this channel, we're going through a series in 1 Samuel. And kind of hung up on chapter 23. And I'll do a second video to kind of tell you where I'm hung up. And maybe we can discuss where I'm hung up and we can move on from there. But I was not ready to progress past chapter 23 with the information in the text. And I figure what better time to share the Passover reflection journal than after Passover. Also, from we have 49 days until we reach Shavuot. And so that is also a reflectory period for sure, because Shavuot represents the time when the Most High gives the law to the Israelites, and he comes down and essentially marries them, gives them the covenant, they respond. So there is a time of reflection and a time of introspection during that time period. So while we're reflecting on Passover, we're also putting in place and implementing, if you will, our methods to arrive at the wedding ceremony, if you will. So it's reflectory, but it's also toward the gathering of the saints at the, the feast of the bridegroom, if you will. So I had a word, and it'll be on that same Patreon page. It'll be public, so you guys can access it and you can look over what I'm saying in a visual form, because we all learn different. So me just talking may not be great, but we did put it into a handout so you can actually look back and go through this word. So the word we're going to focus on in this process of reflection is the word sakal. And it can be spelled two different ways. On the sheet, it's spelled both different ways. So if you're looking it up and looking for the definition, you can find it. But I'm leaning more toward the second form of the spelling because it is consistent with the context, the culture, and the definition that we get from our sources. So we're going to go with the Samic Kaf Lamed. And if I look that way, it's because my notes are over there. Samic represents a thorn or a prop or a prick that causes the head to turn. Kaf is the palm of the hand, or to open or to bless. And Lamed represents to guide. It's a shepherd's staff. It allows something to be directed or to be pricked and prodded on, as it goes on the right path. The definition of this word in a complete picture means the ability to consider a situation to be successful or prosperous. It means to understand, to act rationally, to absorb information, adapt to needs, knowingly guide, and succeeding, and then instruction for comprehension. And when we think of introspection or thinking back, a lot of times we do a lot of the thinking process, but we don't put those thoughts into future action. And we're all guilty of it. So it's not like, oh, Huldah, you've thought so much that you've actually figured out how to think and put it into action all the time. No, part of that process is that consideration of the situation and then eventually being prosperous and doing something. So we can consider a situation essentially in an abstract sense and think on it and ruminate on it 50 million times, but it's what we do and how we carry out and how we implement a plan of change or to refine whatever the situation is what makes the difference. So I noticed, it was so funny, I was going through and I was trying to find a piece of paper to write on as I was getting prepared for this, and I found a note and it had like a checklist, and I flipped the page to find a blank page, and I came across notes, and I don't even know if I ever put this into a video, but it was titled, "What is my Passover Sacrifice?" And so I know for me, Passover always becomes a time of reflection. Passover for the past couple of years has been a little horrendous in the in the outcome sometimes of all the things that surface. And it's a reminder to me, and this year for sure, that in a time of rebirth, in a time of renewal, there is also the agitation of birth. And for people who have not given birth or who have not gone through the process of having a child, you've been by proxy. You've experienced it in the sense that it's not something that comes along quickly. And it is the actual birthing part that is the most difficult sometimes, but it's the most rewarding portion of the process. And so Passover to me represents that time where we're preparing after, our last feast of, our last fall feast. We're preparing and we arrive at this space, and I think we enter into it sometimes with this like, oh my gosh, I made it. But we don't take time to think about what actually led up to that space, and then also what happens in that rebirthing process. And so I had some words on here, but one of the ones that I had was the word shabar, and it's the idea of grain placed on the threshing floor in order to be stomped so that that which is inside can come out. And so it has to do with a bursting out or through or a shattering. And so when you're talking about birthing, a birthing is passing through from one path or one side of something into something new. And if you've ever been around an infant or a newborn, they seem to be the most exhausted people on the planet, right? The mom does the work of birthing the baby, in theory. The baby's doing a lot of work too. But when that baby is birthed, there's like a lethargic thing this baby has. They're limp. They have to learn. There's something weighing me down. I'm not as fluid as I was inside. This place is not safe. Because in the process of growing and renewing, you are essentially meeting another side or another part of yourself. Or you're shedding an old part of yourself, and that can leave you feeling very, very naked in this world, in relationships, in community, whatever the case may be. It is a very, very trying process. And I think a lot of times we enter into Passover celebrating or feasting, but not necessarily looking at all the portions and all the parts of ourselves that we have to confront again, all the parts of ourselves that we must shed to move to the next level. And every time it's a renewal. I know that we focus a lot on I think perfecting during Passover, because as we're taking out bread from our home and leaven, and as we're preparing for the feast, I think we forget the worship and the introspection that happens during that time, and that is also communal. And that was something that was really I guess heavy on me this year, because Passover, I am very introverted in this season because I have a lot to process, especially just regarding this time. And I realized that the process of introspection and of reflection is communal. It's not personal, because you can't determine your own growth. You can't determine your own progress. And sometimes, yeah, we like to reflect on our own, but in reflection, I think we miss things. I know we miss things. We all do. So that was the purpose for this. And so if you wanted the answer to what was my Passover sacrifice last year, it was the idea of a broken spirit and a contrite heart. So this year, I don't think that necessarily ever changes. But this year, definitely, I've realized that moving forward, that it is openness, and the ability to share and to grow and to admit fault. Those are things that I think are extremely important, and to do it in a way that is not defensive and that's graceful and that is positive, I guess. It's not a negative. And so as we're going through this journal, and by now I hope you all kind of have it, we're gonna kind of go through each of them. We're not gonna necessarily answer all of them, but I do want to give you insight to some of the things I put and where I put them. And then I'm going to share a little bit where I feel the Ruach leads in certain sections. And then what I want to do is have everybody take some time, actually complete it. It's not on necessarily a time schedule, but I think once you start going through the process, you'll realize that the information is going to kind of lead you into the next part, and you'll complete it, and I think you'll feel better because of it. And then maybe we can come back together and discuss it in some form or fashion or in smaller groups. I haven't really worked that all the way out. I've been playing around with Zoom a little bit with Patreon, and I like the small group method of that. If you're already signed up on Patreon, then we're already scheduled to actually do the reflection journal. But if you're not, you're more than welcome to sign up for Patreon. Or I'll figure out how I can do it with the larger group of YouTube. It's kind of where my conflict is with that, but we'll cross that bridge in a little while. So at the beginning of the journal, I kind of give a background, and it says Passover is a time of renewal, reflection, and redirection. Each year, those who have joined in covenant with the Creator endeavor to rebirth during this time. While Passover is a collective convocation of remembrance, anticipation, and worship, it should not just be glossed over. The lessons, memories, triumphs, and trials during this season are a reminder that we have come so far, yet still have so much work to do. This year, I challenge each of you to be honest with yourselves and the Father through this journal exercise. This can be used in group settings, but I strongly recommend that the first time you complete this exercise, that it's done alone and without haste, as I mentioned in the beginning. Each section will deal with an aspect of the feast and how you glean insight and wisdom in practice. I don't know if I can emphasize that more. I don't think I can. What we're doing is practice. I also want to put this out there. I think in the process of keeping the feast, and I mentioned this in I'll get to it, but in the process of keeping the feast, I think we believe that we're doing the work, and the work is the feast, and the reflection, I think, is the greater work. And let me rephrase that. The reflection is the work. The feast is what is going to lead toward our reflection, because even when, and I'm talking about we all do it, even when we think we got it down and we're doing it perfect. I think this is like my 8th or 9th. I don't know. I've been doing it a while, and every year it seems like there's a glitch. Every year there seems like something comes up. Every year as much as I try to avoid distraction, there's a distraction. Every year, as much as I try to just avoid everything and just focus, there's always something. And I realize that I'm not getting to this feast so that I can relax and rejoice on all the things that I've done, but I'm getting to this feast so that Yah can work through me. Leading up to the feast, I spoke with Drika and Z, and I was doing some work on Patreon dealing with yeast and leaven and what is leaven and why things have to be unleavened. And the Most High sent me on an interesting journal, and I'll kind of make it concise. The journey, I'll make it concise. So the journey was that when we are unleavening ourselves and unleavening the bread, we are becoming what we know as the showbread. It's the bread of the presence. And the bread of the presence, or the showbread that was presented before Yah in the temple, was an unleavened bread. And it was changed out every 7 days, and it was eaten by the priest. And so when Yah took Israel out of captivity with the Egyptians, he change their diet. Essentially, he unleavened them. He told them, don't go out with leavened bread, but take a new lump, take new fresh dough that you will make bread out of as a reminder of this process, of this journey. And remember, they collected manna every day. So manna essentially wasn't leavened either. When they tried to keep the manna over, then it actually rotted. So manna was collected every day, and they were practicing this process of newness and renewal every day. And it was supposed to do something to the mind. One, cause you to depend on Yah. Two, it puts you in the space of, if this is new and this process is continual, I have to be consistent in this newness. And as we were sharing and reflecting on that process, I was thinking about how during the time of Passover, we are celebrating a newness that we haven't really actualized. Because the actualization or the realization of our newness comes as we begin to carry out the life that we've cultivated throughout this whole year. It's not an arrival, but it's the signification of the beginning of a new journey. And so we get to restart and retry every year. And there is essentially a ritual, right? The idea of Passover and removing the leaven or removing it from our heart and from our space that sets us forward. But also, we're not perfect. And so in the process of beginning the renewal, we have to constantly reflect. We don't say, whoo, I arrived, I'm new, all right, let's push forward. But no, like when you're getting the leaven from outside of yourself, you're reflecting on, what am I carrying with me from last year into this new year? What am I carrying with me from yesterday into today? Like, it's a constant process, and it causes you to refocus and recalibrate, if you will, in order to do the work. It's not something that's futile. Like, we're not living our lives just to live them. It's not about just rainbows and sunshine. Like, there's an actual process, and everything that we do and every process that we go through, is indicative of an expected end. Like, we're doing it for something. And so it does, for me, essentially, it makes me very, very hypercritical of myself and others, because I'm thinking, okay, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? What does this have to do with this? Like, I do it with everything. And I realized in this season that in processing and being hypercritical, it has to be toward a plan and toward an expected end. So, hence our reflection. So I kind of went through as I was creating this, and the first thing I dealt with, I put on here, was the removal of the leaven, because that's like the first part of the Passover process. And so it says, 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread, even the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day into the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And then I put 1 Corinthians 5:7, purge out therefore the old leaven, that ye may be a new lump, as ye are unleavened, for even HaMashiach, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. And so in that on that part, I put space to write for the spiritual and the physical. The physical is actually the process of getting the leaven out. The spiritual part is the spiritual process. So because you got the leaven out, right, doesn't mean that you immediately, especially spiritually, you don't immediately start putting it back in. And the leaven of the spiritual is malice, anger, and all these things. You don't start piling them back in, because while we may remove them temporarily, it's like we're pushing them to the side and then bringing them back. Perfect example. Question came up in our house about things that obviously were like coronavirus prepping, and constantly to keep, from going out into the stores. And so we stocked up on things, and it was like, okay, do we get rid of this stuff that we bought and we haven't used it, which isn't, and I mean, it was like fish sticks and some other things, and they were outside of the house. And I was like, you know what? No, get rid of it. Why? One, you're trusting God for provision. But the second part is, when you just sit something outside, and it was more spiritual in this sense, when you sit something just outside, right? Then when it's over, you're going to go back and grab it and bring it back. But when you remove something, when you get rid of it, there's no place to go back and grab it and immediately reintroduce that stuff back into your space. And so the fish sticks, obviously, just a description of the spiritual side, which is when we're setting aside things, we're not just being good and being nice to people because it's Passover, but the actual work is actually completely removing that whatever it is and leaving it out. So even when you begin to reintroduce bread back into your space, you're not bringing back in old bread, right? If you are making bread from scratch as they would have, and you were yeasting, if for all intents and purposes, you would then have a new yeast starter. So it wouldn't even be a remnant from that which is before. That even would be new. And so that was something that I kind of reflected on in that part, where the idea of being a new lump completely. So whatever I have, later if I get upset about something, it's not something based upon something else. It's not something based upon some old stuff that I'm carrying that I couldn't seem to leave in the past. No, I'm starting over and I'm introspecting and reflecting on those things and constantly now putting those things out, because why would I want to disrupt the newness of who I'm trying to become by constantly carrying old baggage? Okay, so the next section is salvation. During this time, we still haven't quite completed it, but I will on Patreon share some excerpts from With His Own Blood. But one of the things that I think is glossed over in the keeping of Passover sometimes is not only the past salvation that has come from leaving out of Egypt, from the sacrifice of the Hamashiach, but also the future salvation that is expected. And so for this portion, I put, and Moses said unto the people, fear ye not, stand still and see the salvation of Yahuwah, which he will show you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you shall see again no more forever. And so that idea of during this time, how is Yah saving us? Sometimes it's from ourselves. Sometimes it's, as we reflect, it's from things that we should have been killed for all year long as we led up to this time, and still being in a position and still being alive in order to move forward and to be new and to be saved and to be placed in a position to serve Yah again. Okay, so the question there was, in what ways were you able to see the salvation of Elohim differently this Passover season? So as we're reflecting on the Passover lamb and the sacrifice of Hamashiach in his obedience, how have we been able to see Yah and his salvation in our lives differently this Passover? So that's a question that you can reflect on there. Murmuring in the wilderness. I kind of took it a step forward, because when we think about Passover, we stop at, and they got out of Egypt. But there's so many other things that happen in the process, in this wilderness process, and leading to Shavuot, and then leading literally throughout the rest of the year, is essentially a wilderness journey. We are sojourning and we are learning. And there was so much learning done after the actual Exodus. And in keeping Passover and in reflecting and in starting a new year, we are beginning a journey. It's essentially the same journey, but a journey of refinement. And I think when we're keeping the feast and then we're doing it over and over and over again, it shouldn't become, redundant. And for me, I noticed that in a lot of ways, with a lot of things, I was definitely going through the motions. Like, okay, get the leaven out. Okay, clean up. Okay, prep your meal. Okay, and during Passover this year, and it happened literally the day of Passover, as I was preparing, the Most High, it was just as plain as day. It was like, are you Mary or Martha? Are you constantly working and doing the things that should be done, or are you doing them with the spirit that's necessary? Are you constantly micromanaging and watching how everybody's not doing what you think they should do, and at the same time not doing what you should be doing? And that was like a really tough thing to reflect on, and it's something that I know I will have to be working on all year, because I am that person who is constantly doing, and I expect a lot out of myself and a lot out of other people, and finding the balance between work and worship and where that is, and prioritizing worship over work, and finding that space, and not complaining, and finding ways to get things done so you don't always feel like your plate is full. And it's a necessary. And so in the murmuring in the wilderness portion, the Israelites murmured a lot. And we don't always get why, because we know there's constant murmuring, but we don't know why they were murmuring about food, or why they weren't just happy with what Yah was giving them. But we do know that when we stop reflecting, and when we stop taking time and introspecting and sitting down, not only with Yah, but as a community, then we can find ourselves doing that a lot. And we can find something wrong with everything. And so one of the things, and the reason why I put this in here, is throughout the year, how can we eliminate that, so that as we're journeying and as we're growing, instead of murmuring, because murmuring is this thing of, I'm saying it under my breath, or I have an attitude, or I'm festering on this thing, instead of just communicating it, instead of just saying it, so that there is always pure intention in this space. And we can tell that that is something obvious that frustrated Yah, frustrated Moses, it got Miriam leprosy. It was a whole situation, and it's something that is a part of the journey and is a part of the process that we have to reflect on as we move throughout the rest of this year. So one of the questions that was written was, this Passover for many was difficult due to the coronavirus plague. How did this global change affect your Passover season? Did you feel alone? Did you find your joy in the midst of the separation? And that's something, once again, I mentioned before, that is personal, and that each person needs to reflect on, because we experience something different. And I think for a lot of people, we realize how important our spatial community is. I know I definitely did. And how so many of us needed to reinforce on the home front before we want to gather and bring ourselves and our families into a more broader community. Husbands were able to lead their families. Wives were able to prepare. You weren't just hopping on a plane and going somewhere or attending some major gathering, but you were responsible for really taking out the time and preparing your home instead of preparing for the larger group. And I think that's really important. And it was, a reflection of the first Passover, which was kept with individual families or with another family who didn't have who you shared your lamb with or whatever. But it definitely showed that we need to bring it back small again so that we can be more effective as a whole. Okay. Bitter waters. I won't necessarily go through that because it's kind of self-explanatory, but I wrote, often when we leave the sourness of the leaven behind, we run into the bitterness of stagnant water. Where during your Passover journey did you run into stagnancy or bitterness? How was this water made sweet, or what are your plans to surrender in this part of your journey? That one's important. And I think in our group discussion, when we do have it, especially on Patreon, that's one that I want to cover more in depth. Okay. Next one was manna. So in the Passover journey, it's still within the first teens of chapters, we get the blessing of manna to our ancestors. And it says, then Yahuwah said unto Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or not. And so once again, the journey from Passover, right, the passing over the death angel, to the entrance in the promised land was a proving period. And so knowing that we are constantly being proved in our keeping of the feast, especially during the time of unleavened bread and as we're being tried, I wrote, how did the Feast of Unleavened Bread prove you? Did it renew your dedication, or did you just kind of go through the motions? And I'll kind of give some personal insight to this one. After that first day in Yah, okay, what are you doing? Are you working for me, or are you just going through the motions? I think the process caused me to constantly reevaluate that no matter how many times I'm trying to do something the best way or how many times I'm trying to do something perfect, it's not going to be that. And am I still going to do the work knowing that when I'm imperfect, and knowing that the process is imperfect, knowing that the people in the process are imperfect, knowing that the variables are innumerable, like you can't, it's, are you going to continue? Are you going to constantly find reasons why not to versus constantly finding reasons to? And that was a lot of what I personally had to process. Like, okay, when I'm free, because I feel like I'm in bondage right now. School's almost over, but when I'm free, what am I going to do? What am I requiring of myself? What am I going to push for in community? What am I going to push for for Royal Roots? What is that going to be? And is this what I want to do? Is this the path that I'm on? And really having to ask myself, like, what do you want to do? How are you going to serve Yah? Do you want to just throw in the towel? Is this what you want to do? And then refortifying every area, because the idea of proving is to try something and see if it withstands the pressure. Try something and see if it does. And I know I personally have gotten in a space where you get tired of being proven. You're just like, I'm so over it. Haven't I proven myself? But at every level and in every rebirth, if you will, you're constantly going to have to be proven. You have to be proven so that you can be refined. You have to be proven so that you can be refined. And the process never stops. But if you don't want that process, then you're stuck. You're stagnant. You're not going past that. And I had to really, really come to a place of humility, I think, before Yah, and saying, I know I haven't arrived, so I don't know why I'm resisting the proving process. I don't know why I keep dropping the ball during the proving process and saying, okay, well, whatever, I'm just going to do what I want to do, or this is where I'm going to work, or this is what. No, every step and every part of this is a part of that process. And so whenever I stop getting on the threshing floor and being busted open, or whenever I stop going through the fire and being refined, then I'm left in a state that is not the expected end. It's not the end that I want for myself. It's not the end that I want people to allow me to be at, and it's just not. So constantly being in that space, constantly being there, and knowing that every time you're proven, pruned, cut back, every time you have to reevaluate that it is toward the greater expectation. A few years ago, I was reading a book, and I was doing a women's seminar, and this sticks in my head, and I see it all the time, even now in gardening. And it was a story about a vine who was a new vine, and it was being put out, and it was toward the end of the season, and it was pruning time, and the vine was being cut back. The vines down the road were being cut back. And there was an experienced vine and a young vine. And the young vine is in horror. Like, oh my gosh, the gardener is killing all the vines. Why is he doing this? This is terrible. And the closer the gardener gets, the more terrified the young vine gets. And the more experienced vine turns to the young vine and says, why are you so worried? And the young vine's like, he's killing everyone. Like, look at all those grapes they produce all year long. Why would you cut them back? And the more experienced vine shared with the younger vine that this is the process. You produce fruit, and then the gardener looks for the vines that produce the best fruit. And all that extra stuff is just noise. I'm paraphrasing, of course, the story. And so those are cut back so that essentially, like the Hamashiach says, the true vine or the strong vine is able to, all the nutrients are able to go to those vines so that in the next season it'll produce better fruit. So the young vine's like, okay, so what do I do? Because I'm still scared. And the more experienced vine says, watch me. And when the gardener comes through, the more experienced vine puts its branches out anthropomorphically and says, kind and gentle gardener, have your way. And the gardener cuts him back almost to nothing. And when it came time for the younger vine takes a deep breath, puts out its young, fruitful vine branches and says, kind and gentle gardener, have your way. And the same thing happens. And essentially what happens in the next season is that they flourish, because there's not all this extra stuff happening. And I think what that story showed me, and what this year showed me, and what proving is showing me, is that there's always shoots that want to jump out as you're growing. Whenever you're watering something, weeds want to come out of the ground. When you have trees, extra branches want to come off. But you always have to be cut back and cause to focus. And when you're asked to focus, it's sometimes a very disheartening process, because all those little things that are happening are things that we actually like. We may enjoy the people, we may enjoy the process, but then in the overwhelming scheme of things, there is also the imperative of knowing what's important and balancing that, and not allowing those extra things to happen. And it comes with experience. And it comes with being pruned. It comes with being proven to say, is this important? And how important is it? And really balancing that. And I'm constantly learning, that what I'm supposed to do for the kingdom is important to Yah first. It has to be important to me. And who cares if it's not important to anyone else? And then every other thing that feeds, the other parts of me, I like to read, and I like those things are secondary to my purpose, because I have such a short window of time to do what I'm actually called to do, to actually carry out the work that I've actually been put here to carry out. And every time I resist and tuck my vines back, and I don't want to be proven, or I want to go off on 50 million other tangents and journeys, I have to constantly be reminded. And manna was the process of proving. It was essentially that day by day process, and looking to Yah as the provider, and being in community and helping and growing. Like, this was super important. So give you some background on that. Let's kind of move through the rest of them. And provision kind of goes in the same vein. So obedience and provision share an unbreakable bond. How are you able to see the provision of Elohim during this Passover season? And how will you be, and I should have added, but you can tweak it if you want. And how will you continually keep your eye on that? Because I think definitely during this time, we don't realize how much Yah is really keeping everything in balance, and not even just in our personal lives, but in a global sense. How we haven't had to live really through many pandemics, and if we would just obey Him, there wouldn't be as many, death rates within the Black community. And we're beginning to have to look and reflect back, but also at the same time as reflecting back on old. How has He provided? What has He done? Who has He placed in your life? Like, I was so much more in this, but just in general during this time, really thankful. And I shared that with my husband, for provision. Not just the idea of him being a man and doing what he's supposed to do, but looking at how many people also don't, and consistency, and being thankful that that's one of the things that I learned from him. I learned that in doing, it doesn't matter how you feel. Your feelings never determine your doing. Couples, it happens. We can not stand each other. I'm not talking to you, but it doesn't change the lights being on. It doesn't change the bills being paid. It doesn't change if, clothes, shoes, gas, whatever, because that's love. Love is not determined based upon how you feel about a person, because you're not always going to feel good, but you do it because you've committed and you've said you're going to do something. And so during this season, that was something that I really spent time reflecting on and was grateful for learning from him, is that no matter how you feel, you still do. Like if you an old lady once told us when we first got married, she was married for like 50 years, and she's like, we asked, like, how'd you stay married so long? What's your secret? And we were just joking around. She said, it is because we always were friends. And so even if I couldn't stand the person, even if I didn't want to talk to them, I always upheld my side of the deal. And Yah is that. And so if we are to be a reflection of Yah, then that has to be us. If you say you're going to do something, you do it. If you say you're, I mean, I guess that's essential. I guess I don't have to add to it. That's how Yah is. And watching Yah and his provision also caused me to be in that place of reflecting and saying, okay, what are you saying you're going to do, and how are you going to carry that out? Not only from spouse to spouse, but also just in general in community in this space. Like, if I say I'm going to do something, do it. And if I feel a way, like, 1 Samuel 23, communicate that, opening those lines of communication so that no one's in the dark. If we're all in this together, then we're constantly communicating and sharing and not putting all the burden on ourselves and not waiting until I feel good and waiting till I feel like coming around or waiting. No, this is where I am. This is what this is. Put it out there. And eventually in community, somebody picks it up and says, hey, okay, I know you feel like this. I got that. Or, hey, you're studying this. I was actually looking at the same thing. Or, hey, let's all kind of study it together and let's do it in a group discussion. Opening up and allowing more space where it's not just me doing all the work or somebody else doing it, but communicating where there's a lack and then allowing that to be filled. And that's what I think Yah expects for us when it comes to provision. And that's definitely what he's doing for us on a consistent basis. All right. Failure. So this one, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of Yah. We hate to look at failure. And I have a renewed idea of what failure is, I think, after failing so much. Failure is not the end of the world. When you do something that doesn't work out right, pick it up, try again, try it differently. Try it a different way. And if you're constantly failing at something, ask for help. Like, that's something that I know I have a huge problem with. But, okay, I'm not good at this. Ask for help, ask for help. Many of you know I'm finishing up my master's program, and I have had to ask for so much help in this process, so contrary to my nature. I pride myself, it's my Leaven, in being good at things, and especially the things that I know that I'm, pretty proficient at. And this process has caused me to ask for help in so many different ways from so many different people, and it has been frustrating. Just saying frustrating makes me want to tear up, because it's a frustrating process where it never runs fluid. It's different for everybody, but being able to say, okay, I have to email, my program advisor. Okay, my program advisor's not getting back to me. I got to talk to the dean of my program. My dean of my program's not getting back to me. I have to talk to this professor and that person. And it's made me realize that you got to go outside of yourself sometimes for things. And you have to communicate it. And you have to find the people who are going to communicate back, because I think it's frustrating for a lot of us, not only in life, but on this journey, when we reach out to the people we want and they're not there. And then we just stop. But at the same time, Yah has given us a great cloud of witnesses, a great cloud of people to reach out to. And in every season, those people may be different. We all have our core people. We all do. But we have to know that sometimes we have to rely outward sometimes too. And that's very important, because the reason why we fail is because we try to do it alone. As a collective, it's very, very difficult to fail, because there's so many different aspects and so many different people in the equation to bounce things off of. And when we're bouncing things off, And when we're in the position of needing help, I'm learning this. It's a very humbling position. There are things that I don't know. There are things that I don't know how to do yet. And in the process of learning that, it's not overnight. It's not a thing that I'm going to just wake up one day and say, oh, you got it now. No, it's continual. And as you continue to grow in things and as you continue to work together, the failures become less because the group becomes stronger. So I wrote, this is the most overlooked area in my humble opinion of the Passover season. I believe that as we journey into the season, we do so with a zealous and willing heart, not realizing that we are not perfect yet. Passover is a perfecting process. Getting Yah's law, statutes, and commandments were not so that we can arrive and bash other people, but it's a part of the perfecting process. We've arrived at the part of the process where we're not just looping through the first part, but we've actually made it and saying, okay, I will do what you say I'm going to do. Then there's that process of actually doing what he says we're going to do. And some of us are just looping in, I'll do it, but not doing anything. And then some of us are in the journey where we're just marching in the wilderness from Shavuot to trumpets, where we're just like, wilderness. I said I was going to do, not doing. Renewing covenant, renewing covenant, renewing covenant, renewing covenant. Then there's the other side of trumpet, where it's, aha, okay, I've made it to another stage. Now I'm going to be tried for what I've done, right? Yom Kippur, putting it all on the line. Judgment, right? And some of us are at the judgment phase where we're like constantly going around in a circle and having to re-arrive at judgment, right? And then there's also the Sukkot phase, where it's now I've passed under the rod. I'm a part of the flock, and now I'm able to dwell here. But then I need to learn how to remain here. So as I go into this next phase where the Most High is going to prove me, please, Yah, don't let me get stuck in one of these other areas as well. And so failure is being stuck, but Yah is constantly pushing us forward and allowing us to be renewed. So I put Passover reminds us that in all of our efforts, we still need a savior. We still need direction, and we rejoice in the opportunity to practice and correct our mistakes. All right. So these are the more personal ones. In what way did you fail this Passover season? In what ways could you have better prepared? Did you find leaven in your home? That is one I know, because that whole like, and you're going to be cut off forever. Most people are like, I don't want to talk about it. But I read something that was so funny before Passover in my zealous attempt to make sure I definitely get it right. I read something before Passover as I was doing some work with Patreon, and a writer wrote that in the process of keeping Passover, because we're not perfect, there's always going to be imperfections. And those imperfections are a reminder of 1 hour imperfection, but also that no matter how we try as humans, sin creeps in. Definitely for us here, there were moments where I'm like, I had a dream, and it was, I don't think it was anything, I don't want to minimize it, but it wasn't something I was trying to do. I had a dream that in my dream, I opened the refrigerator and there was just like bread, like loaves of bread in the refrigerator. And I was like, what the heck? So that was hence my story about the fish sticks in the freezer, and they were outside. And I feel like that was Yah saying like, yeah, it's outside, but let it go. And I think that also began the quest and this whole process of the spiritual side of, yeah, it's outside, but let it go. I ate a Kit Kat during Passover this year. Let's put that out here. And didn't think twice about it. Should have read the label. Like, you don't eat pork, so you read all the labels. Why didn't you read the label? And literally the next day I'm sitting down, and my husband's like, what, you got chocolate over there? And I was like, yeah, I have chocolate. You want some? And he was like, does it have yeast in it? And it was an ongoing joke because I was being hella anal. Like, hella's California. I know somebody's like, you said hella anal. And about just getting stuff out, and went all through the pantry, and I'm throwing away packets of stuff that have yeast on them. Kids are eating all this stuff. And I go, I don't think so. And I'm starting to like question myself. Read the back of it. 15, 20 ingredients in there's yeast. I was like, I didn't even read it. Right? So in that process of being anal, sin creeps in. Right? So what do? What did I do? I'm like, okay. So I'm like, what do I do? Oh. Threw it out. And it was like, okay. But still like, you're in that space of like, okay, do I die? Am I cut off? But going back to before I was speaking about the person that wrote it, it's a practicing process. And it caused me to remember that me getting the leaven out is not my salvation, but the disposition of my heart and how I do things is how I'm forgiven, how I can repent and move forward. Because I wasn't going to get stuck and be like, you know what, oh well, messed it up. I'm going to eat bread and yeast the rest of Passover and I'll try it again next month or again next year. No, immediately when you're confronted with a mistake or when you do something, you immediately deal with it. There's immediate repentance. And that's what this process taught me. It's not a fester. It's not a wallow in your own pity. It's deal with it, nip it in the bud, move forward, and not giving up on the journey. And finding ways like, okay, do it again. Start over. I don't know, whatever the case is, however the Father, in your own process of teshuvah, repenting, returning, and fixing that thing. Okay. In removing the spiritual leaven, did you lose anyone? I know sometimes when we are going through that process of removing leaven, we want to cut off everything and everyone. And then there are some times where you got to cut off people. What was that process like? Or are you still holding on? Are there things that are toxic for you that you're still holding on to? So that's kind of the nature of that question. Were you puffed up in pride during this season? I know from personal experience, from being around people get into that mode where it's like, oh, I'm good. I'm keeping Passover. They over there keeping Easter. And you're so busy watching over the fence at the Easter egg hunt that you don't realize that you're actually sinning. Why are you watching them in their paganism? Why do you care? Why are you not focused in? And I think that's a constant thing that comes up during this feast because they happen during the same time. There is a choice, one, not to do it, but then there's a choice also to fully focus and put your eyes on Yah, put your blinders on during this time because this season overlaps with that season. And to not get so busy trying to talk to somebody in the midst of their sin where you lose sight of what you're supposed to be focused on. One of the most ineffective ways to talk to somebody about something is when they're right in the middle of it. Like, for whatever it is. If you have a guy and a girl and they're dating and it's terrible, in the midst of that, you can talk to your boo in the face until that person comes to the knowledge that that's not for them. Then there's no real conversation to be had. You can't talk to somebody with an Easter egg in a basket about how pagan it is and think they're going to drop the basket and go on and do something else. They've prepared. They've done the ritual. They're gonna follow through. You have 360 something days to prepare and to be kind and to be gentle and to be a witness. During that time, our blinders are on because we are in Yah's presence and He is watching and refining us. Discipline and all those things start at home. We're under the microscope. Can be worried about what you're doing over there. It's very unfortunate, but I keep my blinders on. I'm not going to step outside the house with the blood on the door to see if anybody died from the judgment of Passover. I'm going to stay inside, make sure I got it right, and then, so save yourself first. That is very important. So were you a sweet witness or a sour saint during the feast? I thought that was funny. I was trying to rhyme. Answer that question. How do you think your life brought in or pushed away family and strangers during this time? It's very important. I'll share more about that process of just family and different things during this time in our Zoom chat. Okay, how will you move forward after this reflection into the rest of the year and the feast? So after going through that, what's the game plan? What are you going to do? And that part, we will all share together because how are you going to do it? And then how is everybody else going to support you in that process? it's not an individual effort. There has to be accountability. There has to be push. It has to be, it's like working out. This morning my husband told me I was fluffy and sassy. Not in so many words, but he's like, you haven't been riding your bike out there. And I was like, oh. So sometimes you need a gentle nudge and you can't be upset. So those are the things. How are we going to support each other, not only in our spiritual walk, but in keeping with the goals that we set and keeping with the commitments that we set throughout the rest of this year. Okay, and so in the space below, there's 3 parts where you're going to reflect on the positive and negatives after you've gone through that process, your plan of correction, and then redirection. How are you going to move forward? And then last is the renewal. So the renewal wasn't the beginning, but it's how you come out. And what are the things you're going to work on? So now that you've gone through the birthing process, you've pushed, you've made it, you're a little lethargic, you come out of this thing, how are you going to renew and get prepared for the meeting of the bridegroom? How are you moving towards Shavuot? How are you rededicating your life to the Most High's law, statutes, and commandments? And how are we doing it with joy? That's something that, for me, is a part of my renewal. How can I serve with gladness? How can I serve without stank? How can I serve without attitude? Like, how can I do that? And with everyone, everything. How can I keep that smile? How can I do it in a loving and kind way? And knowing that I'm also a part of the perfecting process of the people in my space. So yeah, I know that was a lot, but I know sometimes when I post things, I just put it out there and then there's questions. I know there still may be questions, but I want to give a background. I wanted to, commend all you for sticking to it, doing it the first time for yourself, even if you knew it wasn't going to be perfect, or if you didn't have all of the answers or all of the information for doing it, that your heart and your willingness to be obedient to Yah superseded the things that you didn't know, and that in this process you learn things and that you now can implement them, and they've not only affected how you'll keep Passover next time, but how you will navigate through the rest of this year. I am proud of you guys and so glad that we have this space that we can share and that we can grow together. So that's all. Shalom.